Have you ever wondered why life sometimes feels heavy? Why certain seasons seem darker, quieter, and lonelier than others? Maybe you're facing a moment right now where everything feels uncertain, and you're asking, where is God in all of this? If that's you, I want you to know that you're not alone. You're not forgotten. In fact, you are being shaped. You are being molded. God is working on you right now. There is a purpose for the pain. There is a reason for this season. But the real question is, how will you respond? Before we begin, I invite you to join our community here. If these words resonate with your heart and you want to walk this journey together, subscribe to the channel, click that notification bell, and stay connected. Now let's dive in. Life is not always a series of mountaintop moments. There are valleys too, deep, quiet, and sometimes lonely valleys. These are the moments where we feel stretched, broken, and tested beyond what we think we can endure. But here's the truth. These are not wasted moments. In these seasons, God begins to refine us like gold in a fire. He strips away the unnecessary and carves out space for something new. It's uncomfortable, and it's often painful. But this is where growth begins. Picture this. A potter sits before a spinning wheel. In his hands, a lump of clay. The clay has no shape, no beauty, no purpose yet. The potter dips his hands into water and begins to press, mold, and spin the clay. The clay doesn't get to decide how it will look. It doesn't get to resist the pressure of the potter's hand. And if it tries to resist, if it stiffens or cracks, the potter starts again, gently yet firmly working out the imperfections. The process is necessary to create something beautiful. We are the clay. God is the potter. And sometimes life brings us to seasons where we feel like we're spinning on the wheel, where we feel the pressure of God's hands shaping us into what He wants us to become. Maybe you're in a place right now where it feels like everything is falling apart. Perhaps relationships are strained, finances are collapsing, your heart feels like it's breaking, and you wonder, God, why is this happening? But what if I told you this is the very moment God has been waiting for? What if I told you that He's using this time to remove the parts of your heart, your mind, and your spirit that no longer serve His purpose? You see, God loves you too much to leave you as you are. He loves you enough to challenge you, to prune you, and to strengthen you so that you can become who He designed you to be. And here's the thing, when God is working on you, it's not always about comfort. It's about transformation. In John 15:2, Jesus says this, "Every branch that bears fruit, He prunes, that it may bear more fruit." If you've ever seen a gardener pruning a tree, you know it's not a gentle process. Branches are cut, leaves fall to the ground, it looks harsh, even painful. But the gardener knows what he's doing. He knows that without pruning, the tree won't grow as it should. Without cutting away what's unnecessary, it won't bear the fruit it's capable of producing. The same is true in our lives. We hold on to things, habits, attitudes, pride that hinder us from growing. We become comfortable in our ways, even if those ways are holding us back. Maybe you're proud of your independence, your ability to stand strong and rely on no one. But in God's eyes, independence can sometimes become isolation. Maybe you take pride in speaking your mind, in telling the truth no matter what. That's a good quality, but unchecked, it can turn into harshness words that wound rather than heal. In the seasons of brokenness, God begins to deal with these areas. He begins to cut away the pride, the stubbornness, the things we don't even realize are holding us back. And yes, it's uncomfortable. It's humbling to realize there are parts of us that need to change. It's humbling to feel God's hands press against our hearts and say, this has to go. But He does it because He loves us. C.S. Lewis said it like this, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains." It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. When everything is going well, it's easy to overlook the gentle whispers of God. But when we're in pain, when we feel broken, alone, and uncertain, that's when we hear him most clearly. Pain has a way of silencing the noise around us. It has a way of sharpening our focus, of making us ask what really matters. Jesus himself walked through a season of brokenness. Before the cross, he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. In John 12:27, Jesus says, "Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour." Jesus knew the pain he was about to face. He knew the suffering that awaited him, and yet he chose to submit to the Father's will. Why? Because he knew there was purpose in the pain. He knew that his suffering would bring life to many. This is the beauty of brokenness. When we surrender to God in these seasons, when we say, "Father, not my will, but yours be done," something incredible happens. God takes the broken pieces of our lives and begins to create something new. He brings purpose out of the pain. He uses the very thing that seemed to break us to build us into something stronger. Think about the story of Joseph. As a young man, Joseph had dreams of greatness, dreams of being a leader, of doing something extraordinary. But his journey to that dream was anything but easy. He was betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and later imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. For years, it seemed like everything in Joseph's life was going in the opposite direction of the dream God had given him. Can you imagine how Joseph must have felt? Alone, forgotten, abandoned by God and by man. And yet, in those dark places, God was with him. God was shaping him. God was preparing him for something greater than he could have imagined. By the time Joseph stood before Pharaoh and was placed in charge of all Egypt, he was no longer the same young man who had once dreamed of greatness. He had been tested, he had been refined, and because of that, he was ready. The truth is, you don't grow on the mountaintops. You grow in the valleys. It's in the valleys where your faith is tested. It's in the valleys where you learn to trust God in ways you never thought possible. When everything is stripped away, when the things you once relied on are gone, that's when you discover the strength of God's presence. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul writes, "But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me.'" Do you see it? God's power is made perfect in weakness. It's in our brokenness, in our emptiness, that God's strength shines through. So if you find yourself in a season of brokenness right now, I want to encourage you. Don't waste this time. Don't rush through it. Don't try to escape the pressure of God's hand. Instead, surrender to him. Let him do what only he can do. Allow him to remove what doesn't belong, to reshape you into something new. Because on the other side of this season is fruitfulness. On the other side of this season is purpose. And when you come through it, you will look back and see that God was with you all along. You will see that the pain wasn't wasted. You will see that God used the very thing that seemed to break you to build you into something stronger. When we think about the seasons of brokenness in our lives, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. It's easy to focus on what's going wrong, on what's been taken away, and on the things we don't understand. But here's something I want you to remember. Nothing is wasted with God. Not a single tear, not a single trial, not a single moment of pain goes unnoticed or unused. God is a master craftsman, and he is always at work, even when we can't see it. Imagine for a moment the life of a seed. A small, simple seed that seems to have no value or purpose. When the seed is planted in the ground, it doesn't look like much. In fact, It might seem as though the seed has been buried, covered in darkness, surrounded by soil, unseen and forgotten. But that's not the end of the story, is it? Because in that dark, hidden place, something incredible begins to happen. The seed begins to change. It breaks open. It dies to what it was, so that it can become what it was meant to be. Jesus described this process in John 12:24, when he said, "Unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds." That's the mystery of brokenness. In order to grow, something has to die. Our pride has to die. Our stubbornness has to die. Our self-reliance, our control, our way of doing things, they all have to die so that God's way can take root in our lives. And this is where many people struggle. We don't like the process of being broken. We don't like the feeling of losing control. We want growth, but we don't want to let go of the things that are holding us back. We want fruitfulness, but we resist the pruning. We want the resurrection, but we don't want the cross. This is what happened to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. As he knelt in prayer, knowing what was ahead, he cried out to the Father, "If it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Do you see the surrender in his words? Jesus didn't want to face the pain of the cross. He didn't want to endure the suffering. But he knew that the cross was necessary for the fulfillment of God's plan. He knew that through his sacrifice, life would come to many. That's the challenge of brokenness. It requires surrender. It requires trusting God even when we don't understand his ways. It requires letting go of our own plans, our own timing, and our own desires, so that God can accomplish his purpose in us. And that's not easy. It's not comfortable, but it's worth it. Think about Joseph again. When he was sold into slavery by his brothers, when he was falsely accused and thrown into prison, do you think he understood what God was doing? Do you think he could see the bigger picture? Probably not. I'm sure there were nights when Joseph cried out to God, asking why. I'm sure there were moments when he felt abandoned, forgotten, and hopeless. But even in those dark places, God was working. God was preparing Joseph for something greater. In Genesis 50:20, when Joseph finally stood before his brothers years later, he said this, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." That's the beauty of God's plan. He takes what was meant for harm and turns it into something good. He takes the broken pieces of our lives and creates something beautiful. But here's the thing, the process takes time. The seed doesn't grow overnight. The clay doesn't become a masterpiece in an instant. There is a season of hiddenness, a season where it feels like nothing is happening, where it feels like we're stuck in the dark. And this is where many people give up. This is where people lose hope and stop trusting God. Maybe you've been praying for a breakthrough, but it hasn't come yet. Maybe you've been waiting for God to move, but the doors remain closed. Maybe you feel like you've been planted in a place of darkness and you can't see any way out. If that's you, I want to encourage you. Don't give up. Don't lose heart. God has not forgotten you. You are not buried. You are planted. There's a difference. When something is buried, it's gone, it's forgotten. But when something is planted, it's preparing to grow. And right now, in this season, God is preparing you. He's strengthening your faith. He's sharpening your character. He's removing the things that are holding you back so that you can become who He created you to be. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "We are not necessarily doubting that God will do the best for us. We are wondering how painful the best will turn out to be." That's an honest reflection of what many of us feel. We believe that God has a plan. We trust that He is good, but we struggle with the process. We struggle with the pain of being broken, pruned, and refined. But here's what we have to remember. God's plan is always worth the pain. His ways are always higher than our ways, and His thoughts are always higher than our thoughts. When we surrender to Him, when we allow Him to mold us, shape us, and prepare us, the result is always better than we could have imagined. It's like a diamond being formed. Diamonds don't start out as beautiful, sparkling gems. They start as carbon, buried deep within the earth. Over time, under intense pressure and heat, the carbon is transformed. The pressure is what makes the diamond. Without it, the carbon would remain just that carbon. But because of the pressure, because of the process, something beautiful is created. The same is true for us. God uses the pressure of our circumstances, the heat of our trials, and the weight of our challenges to transform us. He uses these seasons of brokenness to make us stronger, to make us more like Him, and to prepare us for the purpose He has for our lives. So, let me ask you, what are you holding on to right now that God is asking you to let go of? Is it pride? Is it fear? Is it control? Whatever it is, I encourage you to surrender it to Him. Let Him work in you. Let Him mold you, shape you, and refine you. Because on the other side of this process is fruitfulness. On the other side of this season is breakthrough. And when you come out of it, you'll see that God was with you all along. You'll see that the pain had a purpose. You'll see that what felt like a season of brokenness was actually a season of preparation. Maybe right now you feel hidden. Maybe you feel like no one sees you, no one notices you, and no one understands what you're going through. But let me remind you of this. God sees you, God knows you, and God is with you. The hidden seasons are not wasted seasons. They are seasons of preparation, seasons of growth, and seasons where God is doing His deepest work in you. David, before he became king, spent years in the wilderness, tending sheep. It was a hidden season, a season where no one saw him, no one applauded him, and no one recognized his potential. But in that hidden place, God was preparing him. God was shaping him into the man who would one day lead a nation. The same is true for you. This season of brokenness, this season of hiddenness, is not the end of your story. It's just the beginning. God is preparing you for something greater. He is building strength in you. He is teaching you to trust Him. He is removing the things that don't belong so that you can step into the purpose He has for your life. So, don't rush the process. Don't fight against the potter's hands. Trust Him. Surrender to Him. Let Him do what only He can do. Because when this season is over, you will come out stronger, wiser, and more prepared for the purpose God has for you. There is a truth that often gets overlooked when we go through seasons of brokenness. God does not waste anything. Every trial, every moment of pain, every tear you shed is seen by Him, and He uses it for your good. This is not an empty promise. It's not a cliche to make you feel better. It's a profound truth found in Scripture. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." Notice the words, all things. God doesn't just use the good moments of your life. He doesn't just use the mountaintop experiences where everything feels right and your faith feels strong. He uses all things, the heartache, the disappointments, the failures, the moments when you feel like you've hit rock bottom. Nothing is wasted with God. But the problem is that when we're in the middle of the storm, when we're walking through the valley, it's hard to see what God is doing. It's hard to understand how He could possibly use this pain for good. That's where trust comes in. You see, faith is not just believing in God when everything is going well. Faith is trusting Him when everything is falling apart. Faith is holding on to His promises when you can't see the outcome. Faith is saying, "I don't understand what's happening, but I trust You, Lord." Think about the Israelites. When God led them out of Egypt, they were full of hope. They had just witnessed God perform incredible miracles. He parted the Red Sea, He delivered them from slavery, and He provided for them in ways they never thought possible. But then they found themselves in the wilderness. The wilderness was not what they expected. It was dry, it was uncomfortable, it was lonely, and instead of trusting God, they began to complain. They began to doubt His goodness. How often are we like that? When God moves in our lives, we celebrate, we praise Him, but as soon as we find ourselves in a difficult season, we question Him. We ask, God, why did you bring me here? Why are you allowing this to happen? But what we fail to see is that the wilderness has a purpose. God led the Israelites through the wilderness because He was preparing them for the promised land. He was teaching them to trust Him, to rely on Him, and to follow Him. And that's what He does with us. The seasons of brokenness are not punishment, they are preparation. God is not trying to harm you. He's trying to strengthen you. He's trying to teach you to depend on Him. Because the truth is, there are places God wants to take you that you cannot reach until you go through the wilderness. There are blessings God wants to give you that you cannot handle until you've been prepared in the quiet, hidden places. David's story is a perfect example of this. Before David became king, he spent years in the wilderness, tending sheep and running for his life from King Saul. It would have been easy for David to give up. It would have been easy for him to say, God, you anointed me to be king, but here I am hiding in caves. Did you forget about me? But David didn't give up. He didn't lose faith. Instead, he learned to trust God in the wilderness. He learned to depend on God for everything, His safety, His provision, and His future. And because of that season, David became the man God needed him to be. When he finally stepped into his role as king, he was ready. The wilderness prepared him for the throne. The hidden season prepared him for the public season. The same is true for you. God is using this season to prepare you for what's next. He is building strength, character, and faith in you. And when the time is right, He will bring you out of the wilderness and into the place He has prepared for you. But here's the key. Don't waste this season. Don't let the pain harden your heart. Don't let the trials make you bitter. Instead, lean into God. Allow Him to do His work in you. Allow Him to refine you, to prune you, and to shape you. Because if you do, you will come out of this season stronger than you've ever been before. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny." Let that sink in. The hardships you're facing right now are not meaningless. They are not random. They are preparing you for something greater. Maybe you can't see it yet. Maybe it feels like nothing good could possibly come from this season. But I promise you, God is at work. Look at the story of Joseph once more. After everything he went through, being betrayed, sold into slavery, and thrown into prison, God raised him up. One day, Joseph was in prison. The next day, he was standing before Pharaoh, interpreting dreams, and being promoted to second in command over all of Egypt. The years of pain, isolation, and hardship had prepared him for that moment. Joseph didn't let the bitterness of his circumstances define him. He didn't let his pain turn him away from God. Instead, he remained faithful. He trusted that God was with him, even in the darkest moments. And because of that, God was able to use him to save an entire nation. That's the kind of God we serve. He takes the brokenness, the pain, and the trials, and He turns them into something beautiful. He uses the very things that the enemy meant to harm us to bring about His glory. But we have to trust Him. We have to surrender to Him. Sometimes, when we're in the middle of the storm, it feels like God is silent. It feels like He's not answering our prayers. But let me remind you of this. God's silence does not mean His absence. Just because you don't hear Him doesn't mean He's not working. Sometimes God is doing His deepest work in the quiet, hidden places. Think about a farmer who plants seeds in the ground. After planting, there's a period of waiting. The seeds are underground, hidden from view. The farmer can't see what's happening, but he knows that the seeds are growing. He knows that in time, the plants will break through the soil and bear fruit. The same is true for us. Just because you can't see what God is doing doesn't mean He's not working. Isaiah 64:8 says, "Yet you, Lord, are our Father. We are the clay, you are the potter. We are all the work of your hand. You are in the hands of the potter. He is molding you. He is shaping you. And He knows exactly what He's doing. Trust the process. Trust His timing. Sometimes the process feels long. Sometimes it feels like the breakthrough will never come. But don't give up. Don't stop trusting Him. Galatians 6:9 says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." There is a harvest coming. There is a breakthrough on the other side of this season. But you have to keep going. You have to keep trusting. God is faithful. He will not leave you in this season forever. He is with you even now. He sees your pain, He hears your prayers, and He is working all things together for your good. One day, you will look back on this season and see that God was with you every step of the way. You will see that the pain had a purpose. So, hold on to Him. Lean into His presence. Allow Him to work in you and through you. Because on the other side of this brokenness is fruitfulness. On the other side of this pruning is growth. And on the other side of this trial is a testimony of God's faithfulness. When we talk about seasons of brokenness, it's important to remember that God is not only shaping us, He's also preparing us for something bigger than ourselves. So often, when we're in the middle of pain, we focus on what's happening to us. We wonder why things are so difficult, why we're being tested, why it feels like everything is falling apart. But what if I told you that the brokenness you're experiencing is not just about you? God doesn't allow seasons of pruning, refining, and breaking just for the sake of it. No, He has a greater plan, a plan that goes beyond your own comfort, beyond your own dreams, and beyond your own expectations. You see, when God transforms you, He doesn't just do it for you. He does it so that you can become a vessel of blessing for others. He does it so that you can be a light to those around you. Take a moment to think about Joseph again. Everything he went through, being betrayed by his own brothers, being sold into slavery, being falsely accused, and spending years in prison, was not just about him. Yes, God was shaping Joseph. Yes, God was preparing him for something significant. But it wasn't just for Joseph's benefit. God raised Joseph up so that he could save an entire nation. Joseph himself recognized this when he spoke to his brothers in Genesis 50:20. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph's pain had a purpose, and that purpose was bigger than him. It was about the people God wanted to save through him. The same is true for you. God is working in your life, not just for your sake, but for the sake of others. He is preparing you to make an impact. He is positioning you to help those around you. The brokenness you're experiencing right now, the lessons you're learning, the faith you're building, will one day become the very thing that helps someone else in their time of need. Think about the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. In John 6, a young boy brought 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish to Jesus. It wasn't much, certainly not enough to feed a crowd of thousands. But Jesus took what the boy brought, broke it, and multiplied it. Do you see the pattern? Before the bread could be multiplied to feed the crowd, it had to be broken. There's a lesson in that for us. Sometimes God allows us to be broken so that we can be multiplied. He breaks us not to harm us, but to prepare us for greater impact. He takes the broken pieces of our lives and uses them to bless others. When we surrender to Him, when we allow Him to do His work in us, He takes what seems small and insignificant and uses it to accomplish something extraordinary. You might feel like that small offering right now. You might feel like you have nothing left to give. But in God's hands, your brokenness can become a blessing. The very thing that seemed to break you can be the thing God uses to bring life, healing, and hope to others. There's something powerful about a testimony that comes out of brokenness. When you've walked through the fire and come out on the other side, you have something valuable to offer. You have a story to tell, a story of God's faithfulness, of His grace, and of His power to bring beauty out of ashes. And that story can be the very thing that encourages someone else to keep going. In 2 Corinthians 1:4, Paul writes this: He comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Do you see what's happening here? God comforts you in your pain, not just so you can feel better, but so you can comfort others. He brings you through the storm so you can help someone else navigate theirs. He takes your brokenness and turns it into a tool for healing. Maybe you've experienced loss. Maybe you've faced rejection, failure, or deep disappointment. And maybe you've wondered why God allowed it. But what if the very thing that broke you is the thing God will use to bring healing to someone else? What if your pain is the doorway to someone else's breakthrough? That's the beauty of God's plan. He never wastes a season of brokenness. He never wastes a tear. He never wastes a trial. Instead, He uses it all for His glory and for the good of His people. The question is, will you let Him? Will you surrender your brokenness to Him and trust that He can use it for something greater? It's not easy to see the bigger picture when you're in the middle of the process. It's not easy to trust God when you don't understand what He's doing. But that's where faith comes in. Faith is trusting that God knows what He's doing, even when you can't see it. Faith is believing that He has a plan, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Aim at heaven and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth and you will get neither." When we focus on ourselves, on our own comfort, our own desires, and our own understanding, we miss the bigger picture. But when we fix our eyes on God, when we seek His will above our own, He begins to align everything in our lives for His purpose. Think about the pruning process Jesus described in John 15. He says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful." Pruning is not punishment, it's preparation. The branches that are already bearing fruit are the ones that get pruned the most, so they can bear even more fruit. If you feel like you're being pruned right now, take heart. It's not because you're failing, it's because God sees potential in you. He sees what you can become. He sees the fruit that your life can produce, and He's removing the things that are holding you back. Sometimes, that pruning involves letting go of things we thought we needed. It might mean letting go of relationships that are not healthy, habits that are not helpful, or mindsets that are holding us back. It's not easy to let go, but when we trust the gardener, when we trust that He knows what's best for us, we begin to see the fruit of His work in our lives. And when that fruit comes, it's not just for us, it's for others. God blesses us so that we can be a blessing. He comforts us so that we can comfort others. He strengthens us so that we can strengthen those around us. Your life is not just about you. Your pain is not just about you. God has a purpose that is bigger than you. So, if you're in a season of brokenness right now, I want to encourage you. Don't waste it. Don't rush through it. Don't let the pain make you bitter. Instead, allow God to use it. Allow Him to do His work in you. Trust that He is preparing you for something greater, something that will bring Him glory and bless those around you. I know it's not easy. I know there are days when you feel like giving up. But let me remind you, God is with you. He has not forgotten you. He sees you, He loves you, and He is working in ways you cannot see. One day, you will look back on this season and see that God was faithful. You will see that the pain had a purpose. So, hold on to Him. Trust Him. Surrender to Him. Let Him take your brokenness and turn it into something beautiful. Because on the other side of this season is fruitfulness. On the other side of this brokenness is purpose. And when you come through it, you will have a testimony to share, a testimony of God's faithfulness, His goodness, and His power to bring beauty out of ashes. As we come to the conclusion of this message, I want to remind you of one simple but powerful truth. God is faithful in every season. Whether you're on the mountaintop, enjoying the fruitfulness of His promises, or walking through the valley of brokenness, He has not abandoned you. He is working, even now, to accomplish His purposes in your life. You see, life is full of seasons. Just as the earth cycles through spring, summer, fall, and winter, our lives are filled with seasons of growth, pruning, waiting, and fruitfulness. But the key to thriving in each season is recognizing that God is sovereign over them all. He is the author of your story, and He is writing something beautiful even in the chapters that feel the darkest. Sometimes we want to skip the difficult seasons. We want to fast forward through the pain, the waiting, and the uncertainty. We want to rush into the season of fruitfulness, where everything feels right and the blessings are abundant. But here's what we often miss. The difficult seasons are necessary to prepare us for the blessings ahead. Without the pruning, there can be no growth. Without the refining, there can be no strength. Without the brokenness, there can be no breakthrough. Look at the story of Jesus. Before He stepped into the glory of the resurrection, He endured the pain of the cross. Before He ascended to the right hand of the Father, He walked through Gethsemane, where He cried out in agony, "Father, if You are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but Yours be done." Jesus' surrender in that moment paved the way for the victory that would come. What does that mean for you? It means that the season you're in right now, the hardship, the confusion, the breaking, is not the end of your story. It's preparation for what's to come. It's God positioning you for something greater. And when you come through this, you will see that every moment had a purpose. Think about this. Gold is refined in fire. Diamonds are formed under pressure. The strongest trees are those that have endured the fiercest winds. Nothing of great value is made without a process of breaking, refining, and strengthening. The same is true for you. God is refining you in this season. He is preparing you, shaping you, and molding you into the person He has created you to be. But here's the beautiful part. When you come out of this season, you won't just be stronger for yourself, you'll be stronger for others. You'll carry a testimony of God's faithfulness that will encourage those around you. You'll carry wisdom, compassion, and strength that will help you bless others who are walking through their own valleys. That's the way God works. He doesn't just bless us for our own sake. He blesses us so that we can be a blessing to others. He comforts us so that we can comfort others. He strengthens us so that we can strengthen those around us. Your story, your pain, and your journey are not just about you. They are about the lives God wants to touch through you. Let's go back to the story of Joseph one last time. When Joseph was finally raised up to a position of power in Egypt, he didn't use that position for his own gain. He didn't allow bitterness or pride to control him. Instead, he used the authority God had given him to save lives. He used the wisdom and strength God had built in him during his years of suffering to bring provision and hope to an entire nation. And here's the truth. Your story is no different. The trials you've endured, the brokenness you've faced, and the lessons you've learned are not just for you. They are for the people God will bring into your life people who need to hear your testimony, people who need to see what it looks like to trust God in every season. In 2 Corinthians 4:17, Paul writes, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." Do you hear that? Your troubles, as heavy as they feel right now, are temporary. The pain you're walking through is not forever, but the glory that God is working out in you, the transformation, the fruit, the eternal purpose that will last forever. So don't lose heart. Don't give up. Don't allow the enemy to convince you that your pain is meaningless or that God has abandoned you. Hold on to his promises. Stand firm in his word. He is with you and he is for you. And here's something else to remember. Seasons change. Just as winter gives way to spring, your season of brokenness will give way to a season of fruitfulness. The pain you're experiencing now will one day become a testimony of God's power. The tears you're crying now will one day be replaced with joy. Psalm 35 says, "Weeping may last through the night, but joy comes with the morning." That morning will come, the breakthrough will come, the blessing will come. But in the meantime, don't waste this season. Don't let the pain harden your heart. Don't let the trials cause you to turn away from God. Instead, press into him. Lean into his presence. Trust him with every part of your heart, even the broken pieces. Because when you surrender your brokenness to him, something beautiful happens. He takes the ashes of your life and turns them into something glorious. He takes what the enemy meant for harm and uses it for good. He takes the trials and the tears and weaves them into a story of redemption, healing, and hope. Maybe you feel unseen right now. Maybe you feel forgotten. But let me remind you of this. God sees you, God knows you, and God is with you. You are not alone in this season. He is walking with you, holding you, and carrying you through. And he promises that he will never leave you or forsake you. So, wherever you are right now, I want you to pause and reflect on this. God is still in control. He is still writing your story. And he is using this season to shape you, refine you, and prepare you for something greater. Don't lose hope. Don't give up. Trust him. As we close, I want to encourage you to take a moment and pray. Surrender your pain, your questions, and your fears to God. Ask him to help you trust him in this season. And if this message has spoken to your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let them know they are not alone, that their pain has a purpose, and that God is with them. If you're walking through a season of brokenness, let me know in the comments below. Share what God is teaching you. Share how he is moving in your life. I would love to hear from you, to pray for you, and to encourage you on this journey. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you don't miss future messages. By doing that, you're helping us spread this message of hope, faith, and encouragement to even more people. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, the brokenness you feel right now is not the end of your story. God is working. He is moving, and he is preparing you for something beautiful. Trust him. Surrender to him. And watch as he turns your brokenness into a testimony of his faithfulness. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. And may you walk forward in faith, knowing that he is with you in every season. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.